live. Might take a wee while for people to join us. So yes, it is Sunday afternoon where I am, having a quiet Sunday and thinking about next week, thinking about what next week's work is going to look like. And I thought this was a good chance to think about what the end of this year looks like for anyone who is going to join us. A lot of people like to have big projects starting in December or in January. So the 1st of January, people might start a new project, maybe learning a new language. But one of the things that I've realized over time is that you don't need to wait for any sort of magical moment in the year to start. You could start learning any time of the year. November is a perfectly good time to start learning. Hello, Jose. Thank you for joining. And starting in November is a perfectly good time to seriously start learning a language. You don't need to wait until January. I think one of the reasons I like the idea of starting to learn seriously in November is that in a way there's less pressure. There's less pressure. Because if you have this idea that January the 1st is some kind of magical moment where everything is going to be perfect and you will get a beautiful, clean run of study, that puts a lot of pressure on yourself. Whereas if you start now, if you just decide to take 30 minutes this afternoon or this morning, whatever time it is where you are, if you decide to take 30 minutes to even just plan what your studying is going to look like, there's less pressure. There's less pressure. Just get it done. Don't think about it too much. I think if you have this idea that you're going to have everything planned, everything organized for January the 1st, if things don't go perfectly well for you on January the 1st, then you might just decide, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not even going to try. Even January the 2nd, maybe you're not going to turn up and do that study. But if you can take half an hour today and get a plan clear, think about what resources you want to use, what YouTube channels or textbooks or TV shows or what apps even you want to use, and then tomorrow you come back again and you have another 30 minutes and you just try to keep stacking those 30-minute sessions day after day after day, then you'll slowly start getting towards your goals. So you're never too late to start and you're never too early to start. If you have a plan for next year that you really want to take language learning seriously, my suggestion is start taking it seriously now. You don't have to wait until January. Also, some people think that they're too old to really start taking things seriously. If you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s or older, learning a language is one of the best things that you can do for your career. And I'm not just talking about English, any language. I've found a lot of use learning Japanese and Spanish. So whatever language it is, obviously if you're watching this channel, I kind of hope that you're interested in learning English, but adding a language to your skill set is a really valuable thing to do. For your career, for your social life, culturally, being able to take in culture from a different country is a wonderful thing. You can learn a lot about how other people live, but also mentally, it's very, very good for your brain development, especially as you get older. So if you are in your 40s, 50s, or older, learning a language is really like the gym for your brain. It's I would say, one of the hardest things to do is to speak a language fluently, actually have an active conversation with somebody, because there's so much to think about. So much to think about in terms of listening to what the other person is saying, but also responding, getting the right vocabulary together, organizing your grammar. You might be coming from a language where the grammar is very different, and that can be a big challenge. I know for me, Japanese grammar and English grammar are kind of they're kind of opposite. So, well, the verb is often at the end in a Japanese sentence, and that requires a lot of kind of gymnastics, mental gymnastics, to try and manage that. But learning a language in old age can be a very valuable thing. So yeah, it's never too late to start learning a language and taking it seriously. So I suggest just get started. Get a bit of paper. I always have these little notebooks kicking about, and just sketch out what is your plan. What do you want to achieve? What are the weak points for you? What do you struggle with? And think about how you can actively work on that. I heard a really interesting quote the other day, and it's kind of the main reason I wanted to jump on and talk about this, was what you're not changing, you are choosing. Okay, so what does that mean? What you are not changing, you are choosing. So before I talk about language learning, English learning, if you like, let's think about this in the context of, for example, your health. It's a good example everyone can relate to. If you're not happy with how your body looks, maybe you're overweight, or maybe you're not as strong as you would like to be, or not as flexible as you would like to be. If you don't do anything to change that, then you are choosing to stay in that condition. If you don't make any adjustments to your diet, if you don't make any adjustments to your exercise routine, then you are choosing to stay that way. Okay? So what you're not changing, you are choosing. Another example would be your finances. So if you are not saving as much money as you would like each month, but you're not changing anything, okay? So you're not making any adjustments to your budget, for example, then you're choosing to remain in that situation. You're choosing to not save money each month. So those are just two examples of this idea. What you're not changing, you're choosing. So if we think of this from a language learning point of view, if you're unsure about how to have a good conversation, but you're not practicing conversations, then you're choosing to stay in that frustrated situation. Okay? So conversations might be hard for you. That's a situation that you want to change. But if you don't change it, and when I say you don't change it, I mean you are not practicing, you're not actively practicing conversations, then you're choosing to stay in that situation. Okay? So if you are frustrated with not having enough vocabulary, but you don't actually take time to develop your vocabulary. So maybe you're not reading, for example. I think reading is one of the best ways that you can develop your vocabulary. If you don't take time to read, then you're not going to be changing or developing your vocabulary. So you're choosing to stay in that position where you don't have the words that you need to converse. So I think that's a really interesting way to think about your language learning situation. What do you want to change? What is it that you're not happy with? Okay, is it your listening skills? Is it your pronunciation? Is it your grammar, for example? Whatever it is, try to decide what you can do about it and actively plan on changing it. So for me at the moment, with Spanish, the thing I'm struggling at the moment is learning the different tenses and the conjugations for verbs in Spanish. It's quite a challenge for me at the moment. But that is why I am going on to ChatGPT. It's my favorite resource at the moment. And whatever grammar point I'm struggling with, I will ask ChatGPT to create a text that repeatedly uses the grammar point that I'm struggling with. And by reading that text, which will be interesting, there'll be some kind of story, or maybe it's an explanation of something. By reading that text and seeing the grammar point repeated throughout the text, then I'm going to become much more familiar with it. So you need to actively make the changes to try and develop your language, try to improve your language. So a couple more things. If anyone has any questions, I'm quite happy to do my best to answer any questions. But in the meantime, I will talk about a couple of things that I have been thinking about recently. I might make a full video on some of these in the time being if these seem interesting to people. One thing I noticed a lot when I was a university teacher was that my students would often compare themselves with other students. Okay, they always kind of wanted to know where they fitted in the class. Okay, so they wanted to know, were they average, below average? Were they one of the better students? And there was no great answer for them. There was nothing that I could say to kind of help them, because if I told them that they were one of the best students in the class, then what's going to happen? They're going to think, well, I probably don't need to try so hard anymore, and they would kind of step back. And that wasn't the right thing for them to do. Okay, the right thing for them to do was to push on and keep working hard, keep doing what they were doing that allowed them to be one of the best students in the class. If I told them honestly that they were one of the weaker students in the class, again, they would probably just give up. They would probably just give up thinking, well, if I'm already one of the worst students in the class, what's the point? I might just give up anyway. So both being the best student in the class and the worst, or one of the worst students in the class, would result in less effort from the students. And also, if I told the students that they were average, they were pretty much in the middle. You're probably familiar with the bell curve distribution. If I told them that they were average, there were some students who were better, there were some students who were worse, but they were just kind of average. again, the students would not be happy with that. And again, they might decide, well, I'm not the worst student, so maybe I don't need to try so hard. I can relax a little bit. I'm not the worst student. So none of those responses produced a good result in terms of improving the students' language. So the key thing, I think, is to not compare. Don't compare yourself to other people, because everybody is in a different situation. If I look at my class of students, some of them will have a different background. Some of them were lucky enough to have weekly private English classes, perhaps. Or it was quite common in Japan for some of my students to have lived abroad when they were very young. Maybe their parents, usually the dad, got moved to another country for 3 years. Maybe it was somewhere else in Asia, or they went to the US or Australia, the UK. And as a result, that student would have a very different experience. They would have years of exposure to the English language. So that put them in a very different place compared to the other students. Maybe a student's parents just had more of an interest in English. Maybe they watched English language movies as they were a kid, or they listened to English language music, or maybe their parents spoke to them in English a little bit when they were growing up. So each of these situations puts the student in a very different position. They have some kind of an advantage over the other students. So you never know what benefits, what kind of advantages. You might talk about your unfair advantage. So the only thing the students can really do is compare themselves to themselves. So think about, am I better this week than I was last week? Okay, and the way you're going to get better is by having a consistent routine to try to develop your ability. And one of the things I really like to do with the students is to get them to record themselves, have a systematic routine of recording themselves. Give them some kind of exercise to do daily. Ideally, they would be doing it daily. And record themselves maybe for 1 or 2 minutes. And after a month, listen to that first recording and compare it with your most recent recording. And over a month, if you've been consistently trying, you will see some kind of improvement. And that is the only real thing that you should be comparing yourself with. Don't compare yourself to other students when it comes to language learning, because there's always going to be somebody who's ahead of you. There's always going to be someone who's a little bit ahead of you, and that can be quite demotivating. All you can do is make yourself better. Okay. So there's a question here from Jose. I feel I'm stuck in the same place when it comes to learning English. I'm 42. Isn't really age a key factor when learning English? How could I fix it? That's an interesting point. A lot of people believe that the best time to learn a language is when you are maybe 12 years old and younger. And certainly there are advantages to learning a language at that age, mainly because your brain just is able to soak in this new language. The kind of language elements of your brain are still able to take in new structures, and you're able to learn a language to a very high level if you have exposure at that young age. Having said that, young people at that age, they often don't have to try. If they are placed in a school, for example, and they're surrounded by kids, they've got a high motivation to learn the language because they want to know what is being said. They want to know what the teacher's saying, what the classmates are saying, and they've got, 7-8 hours a day with other kids just constantly hearing the target language being spoken. But you find that kids at that young age, they don't actively try. They're not using any particular strategy, and they don't really know why they're learning either. They're learning to survive, really. They're learning to survive in the classroom situation that they're in. But as an adult, an adult in your 40s, I'm also in my 40s, I didn't start learning Japanese until I was 25, which at the moment feels very young when I think about it. But 25 would be considered late to learn a language to an advanced level. But I was able to study. I had discipline. I knew why I was studying. I knew the benefits. So that was easier for my motivation. I had this kind of internal and external motivation to help me through that. And you're able to be more strategic. That's what I would say. When you're older, you can be more strategic. You're able to sit down for an hour and focus. You can't really do that if you try to. I've taught kids quite a lot, taught English to kids quite a lot. And when you teach very young kids, you have to change what you're doing. Maybe if you're lucky, you can get 5, maybe 7 minutes before you need to change something and do another activity with very young kids. As an adult, you're able to sit down and focus and do really kind of hard things when it comes to language learning. So there are definitely advantages. You have the understanding that consistency is important. Turning up every day and doing something. You're able to identify your weaknesses and you're able to come up with a plan to target that weakness. And I think the big kind of advice that I would give you is think about what you have been doing up until now. Again, it's back to this idea of what you're not changing, you're choosing. What has your study routine been like? Okay. So if we compare two things, consistency and intensity, okay, consistency and intensity. Intensity would be running a marathon, okay, or writing a book in 30 days. That would be a very intense thing to do. Whereas a consistent version would be to train every day for a couple of years. That would be consistent, that would be sustainable. Writing a book in 30 days is a very, very intense thing to do. Writing a little bit every day, that's the consistency part of it. It's going to take you longer to do it, but it's going to be sustainable, and you'll probably have a better result at the end. So think about what you have been doing, and have you been consistent? Because, and I'm guilty of this as well. When it comes to language learning, I go through a period where I'm very, very intense in my study. I sit down and I try to try to study for 3 hours a day. And usually I can do that for a few days. And then I take a day off, and then I take 2 days off, and then I take 2 weeks off. Whereas a better strategy would be to set aside 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and spend time every day, maybe doing different things. I have a video talking about how you can have 1 hour of study, but you're actually doing different things throughout that 1 hour. To make it more interesting, 1 hour focusing on one specific type of study can be quite hard work. But if you do 10 minutes of reading, you do 10 minutes of writing, maybe you watch a video for 10 or 15 minutes, 10 minutes of vocabulary, you split it up, split that 1 hour into different parts, and then you're able to study for that hour and keep it interesting. So yeah, have a think. What have you been doing, and what haven't you been doing? Again, what are the things you really want to try to improve, and how can you go about improving them? So long answer long. Age certainly isn't the issue. Certainly not 42. I'm 43, so 42. You're still you still have a lot of time to go. What else can we talk about here? I think I had a couple of other things. Last thing you're welcome, Jose. You're welcome. The last thing I want to talk about is how much psychology is important. That's one difference, talking about the difference between adults and kids. When a kid is learning a language, especially a very young kid, they will make mistakes all the time. And it doesn't matter to them. The only thing that matters to them is, do they get what they want? Do they get the piece of cake or not? Do they get to play with the toy or not? And they will just use whatever language they can to try to get the result that they want. Whereas adults, we worry a lot more about what people think. If we make a mistake, maybe people will think that we're not educated or we're silly. And if you have a dream of becoming fluent in a language, then that fear of making mistakes is really going to hold you back a lot. So this kind of fear kills your dreams. Fear will kill your dreams. You need to get over that fear. You need to understand that most people that you try to talk to are good people. They're nice people. And if you make a mistake, a couple of mistakes, they will not think bad of you because you've made a couple of mistakes. So if you've got this dream, don't let fear of making mistakes kill your dream, okay? And understand that mistakes are part of the process. If you make a mistake, the good thing about that is that you have learned what to do better next time, okay? If you use a word and it's the wrong word, and in the conversation you find out the right word, this happens to me a lot. Just now, I'm living in Mexico, my wife is Mexican, so I'm surrounded by Spanish, and very often I will try to use a word, but it will be the wrong word. It will be close. It'll be a close word, but maybe in this situation we don't use this, we use this word. So this happens to me a lot. But every time I try and every time I make a mistake, I'm learning that next time I need to use a different word. So every mistake is an opportunity to learn for the next time. And if you're not making mistakes, then I would argue that you're not really pushing yourself. You're just in a very in your comfort zone. I was on vacation last week. I was down by the beach, and there was a gentleman, an older gentleman came in, American gentleman, and he was a local. He lives in the area, and he was quite loud, so everybody could hear what he was saying. And he made his Spanish was not great. His Spanish was not great, but he didn't make any mistakes, which is kind of interesting. His Spanish was not good, but he didn't make any mistakes because he only used the Spanish that he was 100% confident in. So his sentences were half Spanish and half English. And all of the Spanish words were very basic level Spanish words. So he was making sentences, but making strange sentences, kind of half Spanish, half English sentences. So for him, he wasn't making any mistakes. But he also wasn't speaking real Spanish. The sentences were not fully in Spanish. So I thought that was a very interesting example of hearing somebody speak the language with complete confidence, but still not allowing themselves to grow. So if he, like I said, I think he had lived in that area for a long time. He seemed to know the staff in the restaurant I was in. He hadn't taken the time to sit down and truly study the language. He'd picked up some words over time, and he knew that he could get away with making a sentence that was a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of English, and that was enough to get by. And that's okay. I understand people need to do what they can to get by. But he didn't allow himself to grow by not taking the time to truly learn the language. So don't let fear stop you growing, and don't let your ego stop you growing. Okay, so maybe one of the issues that he had was if he did try to make a sentence only in Spanish, maybe he would have made some mistakes, and he didn't want to do that. He knew that I'm going to throw in some Spanish words so people can see that I'm trying, but I'm going to use English for all the difficult grammar stuff that will allow me to be a bit more confident that I'm saying what I want to say. So yeah, interesting. It's interesting for me just now being in another country. I had many years, 16 years in total in Japan, so I became very comfortable in that language environment. Now I am 43 in another country. I do have some experience of learning Spanish, but I'm very much at the early stages of language learning. And I think that makes it interesting for me as a language teacher, as an English teacher. I get to put my suggestions, my recommendations, my advice into practice. I get to see what works. I get to try out all of these things that I suggest my students try. So I get to kind of go on this journey with you as well. I think it's really important as an English teacher to be learning other languages. Some of the best language teachers I know are not native speakers of English, because they have had the full experience of learning English to a high level as a non-native speaker. I'm a native speaker, so I grew up learning English. Becoming a teacher, you have a chance to think about your language from a different perspective. You get to think about your language as how would you explain something, how would you teach something to somebody, but also having the chance to learn a language to a high level in another country, I think has been a real advantage to me as a language teacher, as an English teacher. And something I do want to make a video about later on is the advantages of learning a language in a country where that language is spoken. I've got many examples of students who maybe they were, let's think about this, maybe they were good in terms of grammar, vocabulary. Maybe if I gave them a worksheet, they could fill in the worksheet very easily. Maybe they even understood what I was saying. But when it came to speaking and participating in a conversation, they were they would get very scared. They wouldn't want to participate. And those students, when they had the chance to go abroad, maybe they went to the US, the UK, maybe they went to Australia, New Zealand, they suddenly had this situation where it was sink or swim. Sink or swim. This is a little phrase that we have. Sink, so like a boat might sink, or a person who can't swim, they might sink down. So sink or swim basically means you have a choice. You can work hard to get through a kind of difficult situation, or you can just give up and you will sink down. And for those students going to an English-speaking country, my Japanese students, very few of people outside of Japan speak Japanese. It's not like English or Spanish or German or one of these more widely spoken languages. So when they left to study abroad, every interaction that they had to do it in English. And that was a huge benefit for them, whether it was going to the post office or buying something in the university canteen or talking to a flatmate or a classmate or talking to their teacher. All of these interactions had to be done in English. And what that does is that the increase in the number of opportunities that you have. So let's look at that again. It's the increase in the number of opportunities to interact. That allows you to realize that some conversations are going to be good, some conversations are going to be more difficult. But at the end of the day, even the difficult conversations, I can kind of get through them. So for me, the most difficult thing for me usually was trying to go to the bank or the city office in Japan, trying to do something that required some technical vocabulary. That was always a huge challenge for me. And I was always terrified. I was always really worried, oh, I need to go to the bank, or I need to go to the city office. But what I found was that when I was there and I was in the conversation with somebody, they would help me through it. Together we would get through the situation. They would show me the form I had to fill in. Maybe they would help me fill in the form. They would help me find the information I needed, or help me explain what I wanted. But I was always terrified beforehand. And especially when I left Japan, I had to go to the city office a lot, had to go to the banks a lot. And the increase in opportunities to have interactions gave me much more confidence, because I knew that if I went to talk to somebody about my taxes, it was fine because I've spoken to them before and I know that we'll get through the situation. So back to my students, living in another country where nobody spoke their language, they were forced to get through. They were forced to make this decision between sinking and swimming. Some students do sink. Some students really struggle. And I have had situations where students have come back. They've finished early and they've come back to Japan. But that was very much a small number of students. For me, I've had a few situations where I've had the opportunity to sink or swim. First was going to Chile. I was in Santiago. My first job after university, I worked for a newspaper in Santiago. And I didn't speak Spanish. I'd never taken a Spanish class. But I had to figure out everything myself. I had to go to places, talk to people. I used phrasebook a lot. I have this phrasebook just now, which you can see is starting to be well worn. And it was very much sink or swim. Can I actually do what I need to get done? Japan, again, was a big sink or swim moment. I lived in the countryside. If you live in Tokyo, you can actually live your life without speaking much Japanese. People in the big cities, especially Tokyo, Osaka, they will speak enough English to get through situations. It's obviously much better for you if you can speak the language. It makes interactions more comfortable and enjoyable. But very much for me in the countryside, very few people actually spoke English. So that gave me many more opportunities to practice my Japanese. I would go into a situation knowing that I had to say this in Japanese. The other person wouldn't speak English. In Tokyo, in a big city, maybe you can go in and you can speak basic English and the person will kind of work with you. And now I'm in another sink or swim situation, which is interesting at this stage of my life. But I am enjoying the challenge. And having learned another language to a high level, I'm enjoying the opportunity to learn another language. So many of you watching this, you have this goal of learning English to a high level. understand that I am on a similar journey to you. And over time, I think I will share some of the successes and hopefully not too many of the failures that I experience on my journey. Well, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. It's coming up to 6 o'clock here, starting to get dark. I might start doing more of these little vertical videos. It's quite an easy way to interact. And next time, quite happy to answer more questions if people have questions that they want to ask. But I think for now that will be it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. I'm close to hitting an important target soon, so please make sure to subscribe and go through the channel, have a look. There's some good videos in there, if I say so myself. So take the time to watch those. But like I said, if you haven't subscribed, please do, and please check out new videos coming soon. Thank you very much, guys, and I will see you again soon.